Hey everyone, welcome back to Kinda Every Day. In this video, I'm going to talk about the gender pay gap. I'm going to go through a few studies that have collated information on the average difference between how men and women are paid, and talk about what that means, and hopefully I can explain everything on a basic level that I've learned in a few minutes and wrap things up. Quick disclaimer, all of the stats I've found are from Western culture, Western countries, and I haven't found any mention of people outside the gender binary. They're just talking about men and women. So I don't know anything beyond that. Maybe this is a representative example for other cultures or other marginalized people, but I'm not claiming either way. I'm just going to present what I know. So, the gender pay gap, I'm just going to quote the first line of the Wikipedia article. The gender pay gap, or gender wage cap, is the average difference between the remuneration for men and women who are working. Basically, there is actually a difference in how much men and women earn in aggregate. It's the sort of existence of this divide has been a point of debate in the past. It is a real thing, but it's not exactly at least what I expected when I learned what was going on. Basically, the main reason for the disparity in pay between men and women is the fact that women work different jobs or different hours. So there are two forms of the gender pay gap when discussed statistically. There's the unadjusted gap and the adjusted gap. So the unadjusted pay gap is the average difference between all men who work and all women who work. So literally everybody, regardless of age, regardless of where they live or anything like that, which occupation they're actually in. And that gap is quite big. We'll get into the stats in a bit, but it's about 81. Women make about 81%, 82% as much as men in the UK and the US. And the numbers are similar with a bit of variance in other countries that I've seen stats for. The adjusted gap is the difference between salaries or pay for men and women who are working in the same occupation. And that gap is much smaller, but it does still exist. So there the numbers roughly around 95+% of pay that women make compared to men. So I found there's a site called shrm.org, which has a bunch of stats for several countries, again, mostly Western countries, talking about both of these. They got information from Glassdoor, which is an anonymous review site for employers. So I'm just going to read out some quick numbers. The unadjusted base gender pay gap, I think this is a recent study from 2019? Yeah, 2019. So in the UK, women made 82% as much as men unadjusted, or 95% as much as men in the same occupation. In the US, it was 79% and 95%. In Australia, it was 85% and 97%. Germany, 78%, 94%. So as you can see, there's quite a big difference between the two. So the primary factor here is the fact that women work differently, and this is a factor called occupational sorting, which is basically women gravitating to or being primarily recruited for certain jobs that have different pay scales and require different levels of education and experience. That's a quote from the site, which I've linked in reference number 1 below. On references, it's a bit hard to do references properly in a video format, so I've got a few links. I've numbered them, and I'll read out which one is which as I go through them, and they'll be in the description below if you want to read them yourselves. So this is reference number 1. It's shrm.org's article. So a quote from Daniel Zhao, I hope I pronounced that correctly, senior economist for Glassdoor. Quote, "Women and men may be pushed into different industries or jobs by a variety of factors, such as an employer's lack of paid family leave. Occupational segregation is not the woman's fault. It's not the responsibility of women to solve the pay gap on their own. People should be able to work in whatever industry or job they want and expect to be paid equally." According to Glassdoor, nearly 2/3 of the US adjusted pay gap can be attributed to occupational sorting and differences in worker characteristics, such as age. The article also says women aged 18 to 24 experience a smaller gap than women ages 55 to 64, as older women are more likely to face job discrimination and to have taken time off for childbearing. So these are significant factors that also come into this. I found a couple of in-depth analyses of individual countries. So reference number 2, there's a site called payscale.com, which does data aggregation for employers in the US. So they talk in detail about these statistics. The article is very long. It's quite some good explanation there. According to them, quote, in 2020, women make only 81 cents for every dollar a man makes. So the unadjusted gap is women make 81% of men's salaries. The adjusted gap is 98%. So it's quite a lot closer. It's bigger impact than found in SHRM's article. They also talk about how much this impacts your entire life. So they calculated how much the lost earnings would stack up over the course of your career. Even ignoring interest, the number is massive. Quote, by calculating presumptive raises given over a 40-year career, we find that women in the uncontrolled group, so that's the 81% pay scale, stand to lose $900,000 on average over a lifetime. Lost earnings narrow to $80,000 for the controlled group, but this is still significant, especially if you consider how lost earnings due to the gender pay gap would grow with compound interest if invested each year for 40 years. So even without interest, women are losing a huge amount of money lifetime, which of course stacks up when it comes to welfare later in life. You know, women might not have as much money saved up, so they get a lower standard of care or less access to resources in older age, which in turn increases the strain on the system at large, you know, because the country needs to help those people or families. So there's a significant cost even outside of the individuals involved. The UK Office of National Statistics also has a good analysis of this. This is from last year. This is reference number 3. So in the UK, according to this article, the gender pay gap among full-time employees stands at 8.9%. So that is women earning 8.9% less than men. So that would be earning 91% of men's salaries, which is a very small decline since 2012. We'll come back to that in a minute. The gender pay gap among all employees it says it fell from 17.8% in 2018 to 17.3% in 2019 and continues to decline. So this is I mentioned earlier from the first source that in the UK, women in the uncontrolled group make 82% as much as men. So that lines up here. This stat has additional detail. For age groups under 40 years, the gender pay gap for full-time employees is now close to 0. So there is some good news here, which is that for younger people, the gap narrows. It goes on to say that, quote, among 40 to 49-year-olds, the gap currently 11.4%. So women making, 89.5% or 89.6% as much as men. 88.6, I can't do maths, has decreased substantially over time. And among 50 to 59-year-olds and those over 60 years, the gender pay gap is over 15% and is not declining strongly over time. So it's actually not getting better for older women. They explain this by saying, quote, one of the reasons for differences in the gender pay gap between age groups is that women over 40 years are more likely to work in lower paid occupations and, compared with younger women, are less likely to work as managers, directors, or senior officials. This, I feel, is one of the bigger causes of this. This is my personal opinion. It's quite easy to observe, at least from the industries that I'm familiar with, that a lot of the people at the top end of especially larger companies are men. They are often white men, particularly. And those people obviously earn an enormous amount of money. The CEOs of large companies tend to be paid disproportionately highly compared to the rest of us. And that, I think, has a large impact on the gender pay gap supposition, which is supported by this explanation here. So what can we do about it? Well, the good news is that we are doing things about it, and it is working. All of these sources have indicated that the gender gap is slowly declining, in that women are slowly catching up to men in terms of how much they're paid. But it is slowly, and we've got a way to go yet. But the good news is the pushes for equality are working. So keep that up for sure. Getting women into positions of power within companies where they can make fairer hiring decisions seems to be a big thing. Each of these studies has also mentioned that there is still a gap in women who follow the same occupation as men. It's a much smaller gap, but there is still a gap. That difference is not explained, at least that I saw. So there are some suppositions which it might be, men being favored in negotiations, nepotism. There have been studies that show that if you send in, resumes with names on them versus resumes without names on them, women are offered more opportunities when they're anonymized than when they aren't. So there's some evidence of discrimination there, even on the same occupation. So that could also be part of it. So we can keep trying to uplift women, trying to get women into better positions within companies, trying to break down discrimination around things like childcare and parental leave, trying to distribute parental leave fairly among parents of any gender, and keep talking, keep pushing for it, and try and make sure that, if you work for a company, maybe see what kind of diversity processes your HR team has, because that stuff apparently makes quite a big difference. And we can continue closing this gap over time. Thank you everybody for watching. This has been Kinder Every Day. I hope you found this useful or illuminating, and I will see you next time. Thank you.